I'd like to welcome everyone back to the next season of 10 Questions. Once again, it was nice to take a little time away from the show and plan for another lineup of great wetplate collodion artists. So if this is your first time listening, please check out our previous artists we've had on the show. You don't want to miss my next guest, though, so stick around for the Season 3 premiere of 10 Questions. Hello there. You're listening to 10 Questions, where we discuss the wetplate collodion process and the photographers that create these unique images known as ambrotypes and tintypes. I'm your host, Chad Shryock, wetplate photographer for Pork Pie Photography based in Fort Collins, Colorado. In each episode, I've asked a modern-day practitioner to sit down with me and talk about how they got involved with this vintage process, share some information on their gear and studio, and provide some valuable insights into their creative process. So whether you're just beginning to dabble your toes in the collodion ethers, or you're a seasoned silverbath expert, hang on and see what develops with 10 Questions. In this episode, we finally get to speak to a true pioneer of the wetplate process in every sense of the word. Traveling across the United States in a horse-drawn wagon on an 11,000-mile odyssey, he was able to refine his collodion process back to its origins. Now, while we've talked to many about the family tree of collodion artists, we've never had a guest that's been such a foundational member of the community. My next guest has been involved with antiquated photographic processes since the mid-1970s and has instructed such greats as Joni Sternbach and Will Dunaway. Based in Dundee, New York, I'd like to welcome John Coffer to 10 Questions. Hey, John, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. This is quite a pleasure and a privilege, too. Yeah.
I'll be honest. I never imagined whenever I started this podcast a year ago that I would have the opportunity to talk to such prominent photographers as I have. But if I'm being honest, I really didn't think that there was any way that I was going to be able to get you on the show. So I appreciate you for reaching out to some of my colleagues to share your story.
Well, I did what I could, yeah.
So before we talk about maybe the John Coffer of today, I'd like to know about the John Coffer in the early 70s before you really started your traveling photographic work. What were you doing before you became this pioneer of the process?
I got my start in professional photography when I was living in Orlando, Florida. I went to college in Florida, and then I took up residence eventually in Orlando, and actually worked for Disney World for a short time when they had just opened. And
I think I read that you were the monorail driver there, right?
Yeah. I mean, we really drove it. It wasn't automated like probably is now, but anyway, I got bored with that, and I had taken photography classes in college as far as learning basic black and white darkroom work and making my own prints and even playing with stuff like, the liquid light from Rockland colloid and, printing on cloth and leather and whatever, stuff like that. I also was an avid scuba diver. And so I really was impressed, or always will be, with the underwater world and the beauty of it. And that was probably one of my greatest passions back then, was doing underwater photography.
Okay.
The professional part of it, photography came after I quit my job at Disney World, and I was looking at the newspaper for, whatever jobs might be available, I'd be interested, and I see an ad for wanted studio photographer. So I sent a letter to him, and my roommate at the time, and we're still best buddies, he does my website for me. He lives down in Florida.
Okay.
Anyway, he said, "You got like a snowflake chance in hell to get that job." And I said, "Well," he said, "You don't have any experience as a studio photographer." I said, "Yeah, I know, but it's worth a try. See what happens, So, yeah, long story short, they hired me. And they kind of liked the idea that I wasn't, trained by some other studio's methods or whatever, because they wanted to, get me in their way of doing things and train me. They wanted stuff to be done, and so I worked for them for a couple years, and then one of the things that kind of helped nudge me in the direction of tintypes and early photography. Other than that, I had been given several tintypes as an 8-year-old by my aunt, and I thought they were fabulous, and I always wondered how they were. And also, stack of stereo views and stereo viewers and all that stuff, and I just thought those things were really incredible. The home office of the company I worked for, this portrait studio I worked for, was in Detroit, Michigan, and they had me up for some training and such there in Detroit. We had a couple of days to ourselves, me and a couple of other guys that worked there, and they decided to go to Greenfield Village at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan.
Yep.
So I went there, and I was just impressed. I thought the place was incredible. I've always been an avid lover of history and antiques and everything, so it was just right up my alley. And so I, just walking around, I see, wow, there's the tintype gallery. So I went over to it, and it was closed, and it had been closed for a number of years. It was just a static display, but there was, the one that they built in 1929 when they opened up the Greenfield Village, and it had been run by Charlie Tamir, who Ford got off the factory floor that had gone to work for him in 1909. But anyway, a lot of his work was in the window of this studio building, little skylight gallery building, and I was just really impressed with it. Many of them were, like the multiple image plates that they often did, and tintypes for tintypes back in the day. And anyway, I saw that and I said, man, that's fabulous. And about then a Model T drove by, and they gave rides there in Model Ts and stuff. So I told my friends, I said, someday I'm going to do that, and I'm going to have one of those. I pointed to the Model T.
Okay.
and so I've accomplished that, but I have 3 Model Ts actually and 2 Model A's right now. But kind of, I add a little, fire, a little gas to my fire a little bit. And, working for the studio got to be monotonous after a while. The senior pictures, the school band pictures, all that stuff that were not a lot of fun. And I was just looking for something to find my way out of there and still be a photographer professionally. And so along came, the bicentennial year. Everybody was, rediscovering crafts of all sorts, old crafts, and the history of this and the history of that. And I decided I'm going to pursue the history of photography. And I just happened right at the tail end of before I quit, I was coming home from the bank in my old Ford Econoline van, and there was a little shopping center right there by the stoplight, and a little store just opened up in one of the spaces there. It was a buy-sell trade camera store. And I was just sitting at the light. I look over and I see in the window, I see the shop in the window. I see this big wooden 8x10 camera, and it was one of those epiphany moments where I was like, that's it. And I zip in there and I go in and say, how much for the camera? $50, sold. And I said, this camera is going to change my life. Yeah, I decided that, to make that camera work for me and to pursue the old historic processes, because as quickly found out, it was nearly a lost art, a lot of this stuff.
Right.
And I took a trip up to, I called around, I went.
I was going to say, so you bought this camera without really knowing a lot about any of the process piece of it then?
That was my first view camera. I had not even shot with a view camera before. And, I started off just shooting paper negatives just to get some use out of it, and which works good. But I wanted to do the old process, like it was done in the Civil War. I was always a Civil War buff and such. So I said, well, if anybody's going to know that, how this is done, I'm going to go up to the Smithsonian Institute.
Okay.
So I did. I drove up there and saw their exhibit, and it was really nice, but it was sort of generalized, for the public. And so I went to the front desk and I said, "Can I talk to the curator for that exhibit, for the history of photography?" And she said, "Sure." I put you on our in-house phone line. So I talked to this man, and he was very nice. And I said, "I wanted to learn how to do wet plate collodion tintypes, just like they were done, during the Civil War." And he just, come right out and said, we don't know anybody, and if you find somebody, you let us know that knows how to do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is really a lost art, So
Yeah.
that actually invigorated me more than, dissuaded me. I said, I'm getting on the ground floor or something here.
Yeah. And that's something I think a lot of people don't really understand in today's world, right? Because, we've talked to a lot of people that are trying to learn the process in kind of the pre-internet days, the mid-90s, and today, we have chats about how easy it is to find, not only full descriptions of the process, but more than likely there's a tintypist that's not far from anybody around today that could not only tell them about it, but fully kind of demonstrate the process. So we're talking about back in the mid 70s. You mentioned 1976. I mean,
right,
practically an impossible time to track down any firsthand knowledge of the process.
Yeah, there were no doubt a few people scattered here and there, and I've communicated with some people that over the years that said, "Oh yeah, back in '73, I messed with making ambrotypes and things like that." Just today I was looking at some of my literature and stuff, and that was they messed with it, and then they went on with life or whatever. Yeah, to find somebody who was really, doing it as a profession or teaching it full time or whatever, it just didn't exist. So
probably just folks in the reenactment field at that time, right?
No, there was nobody doing wet plate collodion at the reenactments until I did.
Wow.
Yes, and I know some have tried to float it around that had always been done at reenactments, and it hadn't. I mean, it just hadn't. I started going to the reenactments in '76, and there was simulated things, that in '76 there was the old time photo craze was exploding. What we call the old timey photo booth business, and it was exploding. All the shopping malls seemed to have a Professor Bloodgood's Good Time Emporium franchises. I'm telling you, and I'd go down and I'd see some of these people, and I'd say, "Well, are you using the original process?" And they, "Oh, wow, no way! Are you kidding me? That stuff is dangerous and expensive, and basically telling me you're a fool to pursue that."
Yeah, I think even in my family, we've got some old-timey type photos of me whenever I was a kid and my brother, and we're all dressed up in kind of the Western garb, and it's kind of a sepia-toned, print.
Yeah.
Must have been the fad then, I guess.
Oh, it was. And it made people money and stuff. It was a business model. That was the nature of things. And even at the Smithsonian, when I was there in '76, the curator said, "Well, have you seen our exhibit at the 1876 building?" They had there was like the latest in 1876 exhibits and so on. Anyway, and he said, "There's a couple guys over there making tintypes, but they're not wet plate collodion." So I said, "Sure, I'll go over and visit with them." But before that, anyway, he had told me, he says, "Well, here's a couple books you should order. They just came out by Morgan & Morgan. They did a reprint of the 1863 Silver Sunbeam."
Okay.
And they did a reprint of Estabrook's Ferrotype and How to Make It. I think it's 1872. And he told me he told me about these books, and especially the title, The Ferrotype and How to Make It. I thought, oh man, I got it made now. I get these
There you
books, and
go.
I'll just
Yeah.
I'll study it, and I'll be on my way. I had restored antique cars and things, and I had the workshop manual. And I always thought, if I got the workshop manual, no problem. And I
Right.
thought, well, this would be like the workshop manual. But anyway, I went over to the 1876 pavilion, and I talked to these guys there. It was just basically the old time photo thing. They had the clothes rack with all the costumes and such. And I said, well, what you doing? And they were shooting Rockland colloid dry plates. Rockland colloid at the time was manufacturing and selling black anodized aluminum, gelatin coated dry plates.
Okay.
Direct positive. Other than the anodized aluminum, they were virtually the same as the early 1900s dry plates, but they were not correct to 1876, which I pointed out to the guys, and of course they said, I kind of rolled their eyes and were, well, whatever, you got to do what you got to do, and and that sort of thing. And but anyway, I thought, well, maybe I ought to try those plates too, as just sort of a interim thing. So I went back to Florida, and I ordered the books, studied them, and they just didn't make heads or tails to me. They were, especially the Silver Sunbeam, it was like John Tyler was talking to his peers of the day.
Right. Yep.
Not to the layman beginner guy.
It's not really a step-by-step guide, for sure.
No, and many of the chemical names we don't use those same terms anymore. I could translate the weights and measures. That wasn't a hard thing to do, but names of chemicals in that were weird. I'd ask chemists and stuff, what is this? They're like, I don't know. Like the proto-oxide of iron. That's iron sulfate.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I thought, well, in the meantime, I'll use these Rockland colloid dry plates. I start doing some reenactments and get along with them best I could, until I could figure out how the wet plate process is done. I did very early on about that time, though. I did Japan a big batch of Japan, ferrotype plate 10.
Okay.
Because I thought once I get this down, I'm going to go right into making wet plate collodion ferrotype 10 types. Anyway, but it didn't get used until many years later. I used the Rockland plates and did reenactments. I did kind of a road thing in my van, going around to events and places. Then I had a couple little studios. I had one at a ski resort in North Carolina. The Phoenix Tintype Gallery was what I had there. And then I had one at downtown Orlando at a little upscale shopping plaza thing called the French Market. And so I did these aluminum dry plate Rockland coil tintypes there. And I also sold early record players, Edison talkie machines and stuff like that too, which I'm into. But felt like I was kind of not getting anywhere with it, and,
Right.
And I wanted to do something radical. And I was coming back from a Civil War reenactment that I got to doing these Rockland colloid plates, and as I was coming back down the backcountry roads, it just kind of hit me out of the blue sky that I could be a horse-drawn traveling photographer if I wanted. There's enough back roads in this country that I could do that.
Okay.
And then I could live out of my wagon. My expenses would be super low. Make my living doing portraits along the way. And that could be done. And so I talked it over with various people. One of my old friends who was in his 80s had been a professional photographer in Iowa. He told me, he said, John, in your 20s, It's the time to do that. Don't wait till you're old. Do this while you're still young. And I,
Okay.
and I, and I said, yeah, you're right. This is it. I was meant to do this. You know, so I pursued it. Got my stuff together. Sold my condominium. I had sold off a whole bunch of stuff. I had to pay my debts off for that. I went to Lancaster County. I got a spring wagon from the Amish, put it in a warehouse in Florida for a while, and built it into a darkroom wagon. And then I hauled it back to Lancaster County with a rental truck, and had enough money to buy my horse. I went through tried out a couple, and then finally I landed on good old Brownie, and I was all set. Amish there helped me out tremendously, gave me a place to stay, helped me, trained me how to drive a horse and wagon. I knew about horses. I grew up with riding horses, but I didn't know anything about driving horses and that. But so I launched out at age 26. At that point, I had my big 8x10 view camera, Century number 4, and a big old brass lens on it. All the money I had in the world was $145. I had those Rockland plates, and I said, I'm going to make a living. This will work for me.
So you took off before actually of mating a true, authentic ferrotype at that point.
Right,
then. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
I had made it. I was on my list, and I was like, someday if I'm going to, if I come on somebody that knows how to do this, I'll spend time with them, whatever it took. I was confident I would eventually do it, but it hadn't come to me yet.
Yeah.
I hadn't landed on the right situation or the information, or like I said, I had the Silver Sunbeam and the ferrotype how to make it, and I carried that with me in the wagon, and I read those things over and over again, but it hadn't come together. So I just went on as a horse-drawn traveling photographer. I also made dry plate glass negatives, because you could still get them from Kodak.
Okay.
They're gelatin-based, only blue light sensitive, monochromatic plates, similar, basically like the ones he started in business with in 1880. And I could also get a POP paper that was labeled studio proof paper that Kodak made. That was a gelatin-based POP paper that was similar to stuff from around the turn of the century that you could gold tone and everything. And so, yeah, I would shoot the tintypes that were the Rockland collodion ones, and dry plates, and make these POP prints for people. But primarily the tintypes was my bread and butter as I went.
How long did it take you to learn the process after you left? So,
when in 1976, when I went to the Smithsonian and all that, to get rolling with it, it took 6 years.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was out, just nomadic in the wagon for many years. See, and when I got to the West Coast, I started going north to Oregon. I went to Oregon. It happened that some local people said, we ought to go check out Jacksonville, Oregon. That's a real historic town, one of the earliest towns in Oregon, and you'd probably do well there doing your tintype. So I went there and found a location, and put my banner out, and offered my services. And some local fellow dropped by, and he said, hey, I like what you're doing. You should go check out our county museum. And it's full of the equipment and his work of Peter Britt, who was the first photographer to the Oregon Territory and settled in Oregon there. And he had helped start this town of Jacksonville, found the town. So I went over there, and they had dedicated the whole museum to Peter Britt, because they had recently had all his equipment, and he kept everything. He had kept everything, all his notes, his manuals, anything and everything his descendants had in storage, and they donated it to the museum. And so the whole museum was Peter Britt.
So
And
this sounds
so,
like the missing piece, right? That you were looking for almost, kind of the decoder ring,
yeah,
maybe.
this was the, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, for me. I soon realized. I mean, the people there were super nice. I told them what I was doing, and they thought it was really interesting, and they wanted to help me all they could. And so they said, well, there's the file cabinets of all his papers, and there's a Xerox machine over there. Just help yourself. Just, if you need to copy something, go just go for it. And so I did, and I found a lot of his writings. I found a early manual, which was really helpful. Was the Ellis's Amber-type and photographic instructor manual from 1856, I believe it was,
Nice.
and it was written for just the yeoman person, not for the elite. I was like, wow, now I get it. Now I see what he's talking about in the Silver Sunbeam.
Right, right.
And so, but at the time, I was still nomadic, and to get the chemicals together was not being. I couldn't do that yet. But at that, leaving that museum, I was absolutely 100% confident. I said, I can do this now. If I just get the chemicals I need, I can do this. And so, I had the winter over in Oregon, and then crossed over the Cascades in the spring, and decided to head east again. And then the next wintering over spot that I had, you can't travel in the Midwest in December and January, deadly, cold.
Right, right.
So I wintered over at a place called the Living History Farm in Des Moines, Iowa. So it just happened that, they let me take care of livestock and trade for a nice warm apartment they had at the corner of one of the old restored houses they had there. And it just happened that one of the volunteers there, a guy named John Zeller, was really into daguerreotypes. And he heard about me, and we hit it right off. And he said, yeah. I says, if you need chemicals, my dad is a professor of chemistry at Drake University, and we can get whatever you need.
Nice.
At no charge. So, and he also, because John Zeller was trying to make daguerreotypes himself, getting chemistry and stuff together for that. And he told me, he says, yeah, there's this company that's just started up called Photographer's Formulary that, he showed me their catalog, and I said, wow, there's collodion listed here. And iron sulfate, yeah. So there were some various things I ordered from them, and I had an address then, the Living History Farm. John Coffer carried the Living History Farm. And so between that and the smuggled chemicals out of Drake University, I was up and running. I mean, my first try, I got an incredibly good image, and it was a ferrotype tintype. I didn't shoot glass till on into things.
So how excited were you whenever you shot that first plate and you got an image that you could actually tell what it was? I mean, that's got to have been
I could. It was very clear. I was just like ecstatic. I was like, I could do it. I could do this. It was just a simple picture that I started with, a quarter plate, ferrotype tintype of a basement window. It was sort of like a window well, because I had made a little crude darkroom in the basement of this building, in the boiler room. I said, if I point my camera at that window and I can just get the lattice work of the window to show, I feel I'm on to something. Well, I got more than just the lattice work. I got the ferns that were outside of the window and various things. And it wasn't until years later that I heard about the Fox Talbot famous lattice window. It's interesting how I went the same road as he did, and not knowing, I said, well, I went upstairs from like the upper floor of the big building there. It was the Flynn Mansion, they call it. And I said, I want to shoot a picture out the window of the general store and the ground, the barn and such. And I shot those plates, and they turned out just really good. And I said, this is it. I'm onto it, So coming into that spring, I just dropped those rocket plates like a red hot horseshoe. I said, these things are junk.
Yeah.
And they were problematic. Very often they were problematic. So I said, this wet plate is so much easier and more reliable. I decided that it's wet plate all the way now. And so I moved out of the Flint mansion as the weather warmed up, back to the wagons, and started doing portraits of the tourists or whoever on tin types on black Japan tin, ferrotype plates. Actually, I used they call black tin. It's like mild steel that's not tin plated. They use it for shim stock a lot of times.
Okay.
Like you get it at the auto parts store. So, and then later on, I started cutting up old tin cans and Japanning, and then I also found a source for bright tin. I started Japanning that, and I would Japan it on an old file cabinet box I found somewhere, and over a campfire. And the Japan was some old asphalt that I found in a half-empty 5-gallon drum in an old shed, and it worked. So anyway, but still, I was up against it as far as, for the longest time, they're all, on the road, and he was doing wet plate, where the tourists and stuff would say to me, "Oh, my brother had this done at Knoxbury Farm last week. He dressed up like Matt Dillon, and his wife dressed up like Miss Kitty." And I said, no. They did not make a real, authentic tintype of your brother.
Right.
That was just a brown tone, whatever, Polaroid or whatever. And he was like, and people they would just go over their heads. They go, "Oh, whatever. I just want to dress up in a costume." And I had a few costumes. I had to have them, but they wouldn't get their picture made. I mean, although I did, pictures around the Living History Farm and the people that worked there who were in character and so on. And that summer is when I got my first apprentice, wet plate apprentice.
Okay.
There was a fellow that worked there and lived on site. He had a modern house he worked at the 1840s site. But anyway, his son would come by my camp and hang out, and he was only 14 years old, and he seemed to be quite interested in what I was doing. And so one day he asked me, "Could you show me how to do this?" And I said, "Sure." So I got him going with it, and he got a stroke of luck. Came along. He went to an estate sale there in in the area, and landed on a whole bunch of original wet plate equipment. And he had like a stereo camera, he had an 8x10 camera. He got it for peanuts. They didn't know what it was, sort of thing.
Right.
And so
I hate those people.
Yeah. I was like, drooling over it, but it was his stuff, and I said, "I'm going to show you how to use this stuff." And he caught on to it right away. He was making great stuff, great images. So that was my first apprentice, and his name was Mike Tatey. And years later, I found out that he had got his driver's license when he was 16, and started tearing around in cars and motorcycles. I just forgot all about the wet plate photography.
Well,
sadly, he would be 60 years old or something now, or 50. So now, and one of the longest running wet platers other than me, if he had stuck with it, but he didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But so anyway, while I was at the Living History Farm, and I had actually, back up time here a little bit, I had met a woman out in California on my travels, and she wanted to jump in the wagon with me and travel.
Okay.
And so we eventually got married, and she was with me, there at the Living History Farm. She was getting tired of trying to, both of us sleep and live out of the photographic van wagon. And I didn't blame her. I said, "Yeah, it's pretty tight." I said, "No problem. I am going to build up a second wagon." And,
that's probably not what she had in mind.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. She was into it. She liked the idea of the history of it and all at that time anyway. And so um, I was able to buy an old farm wagon at an auction, 1880s farm wagon. The wheels were half rotten, but I got it for $100. Borrowed a pickup from the Living History Farm, hauled it to the Living History Farm, and that over the next year or so, I restored it, rebuilt the wheels, and built a top on it. I even fabricated a small wood stove using the shop tools at the Living History Farm. I made it like what they call the sheep herder's camp wagon, and we called it the camp wagon. So, it was a 2-horse wagon, but horses were just awful expensive to get. So I said, well, I can always afford a couple bull calves. The Living History Farm was buying some cattle, and I said, can I tag along with you? And I did, and I got the farmer to the side. I said, next 2 bull calves, could you bring them to the Living History Farm? I'll buy them. So he did, and trained them up as for oxen. And they pulled the photograph or the camp wagon. I drove the oxen, and my wife drove Brownie and the the photographic van wagon. We were actually at the Living History Farm for a year and a half to get all this together, and then one day the day came along. On into late spring of '83. I had started shooting wetplate in '82. The '83, that late spring '83, I said, the boys are just big enough. I think they could pull that camp wagon, because I'd worked them like every day, twice a day. I built them up, and I forged out their ox shoes at the blacksmith shop and shoed them myself. And they're ready to go. So we headed out. And of course, a lot of people at the Living History Farm just couldn't believe it. They were just on this is this is not going to work, But all along all this stuff, I had this, rock solid faith that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
This is going to work.
Yeah, you were probably like one of their exhibits there if you'd been there for that long.
Yeah.
I mean, get people that I guess we probably visited there were able to kind of see you guys living and working just as the original pioneers would have been, right? So
yeah, it was sort of surprising that in certain situations where I'd be driving my oxen on the town square at the Living History Farm, and somebody would say, ask about the oxen, and I say, no, they're mine. And then somebody say, look, they have shoes on them. I said, yeah, I shoot them because I'm going to take them across the country, pulling my wagon. And they were like, is he doing like a first person thing or something?
Some kind of a performance artist, yes.
yeah, right. I'm like, no, I'm not I'm for real. And I came here in my horse and wagon after zigzagging across the country with my horse Brownie pulling it, and now I've got 2 wagons. It was where I'm expanding, and I'm still a traveling 19th century photographer.
Right.
It was just like mind-boggling to so many,
Yeah.
Which I can understand that, but I was just being me,
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to be an eccentric. Some people say you're an eccentric. I say, what? I'm not trying to be an eccentric. I'm just trying to be me.
Right. John, whenever you were traveling after that, so you had started shooting wetplate at that point. What did people think about really what you were doing? I mean, whenever you were making these stops and taking portraits or pictures, I mean, you probably ran into a lot of people that thought you were like some traveling magic show or something with this, right?
Well, I got a lot of positive response. And I'm going to back up here some too on this, is that when we wintered over in Oregon, before, I made it to Iowa, Des Moines, and Living History Farm, I decided it was time I write a book. So I wrote the first volume, the first edition anyway, of Horse Hairs in My Soup. And it was a book about the wagon travels up to that point, all that had the highlights of all that, my background, the various adventures, and there was tons of them on all those miles, and put it in a book, loosely, stapled together book, not a hardbound book, paperback, and by the grace of God, we was able to use the equipment at the little town newspaper office that I was camped there for the winter, there in Brownsville, Oregon, and I got the book printed. Let's see, the cost of the printing and everything, the paper was something like 85 cents a book. And,
okay, wow, that's quite the deal.
Yeah, and I sold them. I would sell them for $4. Okay, so by the time I got to, we printed it was like 1,200 books, something like that, 1,200 books. By the time I got to Des Moines, I was sold out.
Wow.
So not only was I a traveling 19th century photographer, I was a traveling author, selling my books. And I was stopping and giving demonstrations, schools, and talking to groups, as well as just stopping and putting my banner out and doing portraits of whoever might come along. So, I say that because, there are those out there who would like to marginalize me as that guy that was just sort of on the fringes, that things that I was sort of under a rock all those years.
Yeah.
And that's not true. I was in the public eye tremendously. When I was, first starting out from Lancaster County, going west, and that, almost every day on small town newspaper would interview me, and then the larger cities would send a reporter out. Associated Press that ran stories on me. Big papers like the L.A. Times. I mean, were doing all these stories. I was doing, interviews for TV, radio, etc. as I went. So I wasn't like some, fringe character under a rock. I was seeing the praises of the history of photography, and then once I started wetplate, the history of the wetplate, process, and the actual how tintypes were actually made, and amber types and glass negatives. And I was making, I went on the road too at the Living History Farm. I started doing glass negatives and albumin prints as well, as amber types. And then, as I was going east with the oxen pulling the camp wagon and the photographic van, we didn't get far. We weren't out of Iowa yet, and I was stopped by a deputy sheriff and an area called the Amana colonies. And I was like, oh boy, what did I do wrong now? And he came over, he said, I got word from NBC Today Show. They want to talk to you. And I was like, really? He said, I'll give you a ride to the phone, which was awful nice of him. I was sort of out of the line of duty. And so I looked at my wife and I told her, and I said, I don't know, do I want to be on the NBC Today? She's like, no, you got, no, do it. And I was like, all right. So I went and talked to them on the show, the people there at NBC, and they said, we're going to send a crew right out, and we're going to do a segment on you for a show that Bob Dobson had. There was something to do with the American dream or something like that.
Yep, I've seen this clip on YouTube. You can still find it out there. There's about a 5-minute short.
Yeah. So anyway, they spent like a couple of days with me doing their video of me driving the oxen wagons, the brownie, talking about this, that, showing off. And I did a really nice portrait of an older couple that were dressed in their old Colony Amana church garb in the segment. So, there I was, national TV, demonstrating the process.
Today's American Story with Bob Dotson is about life at its most basic, stripped of safety nets. It's also about finding new frontiers while living like a pioneer by choice.
One of the most interesting artists in the country can't be reached by phone. He's got a computer room in a haystack, but no internet connection.
This is the glacial acetic acid in here.
Students pay $585 to camp on John Coffer's farm in upstate New York and learn tintype photography, a style that was all but forgotten after the Civil War.
And so, yeah, later as we went on, there was more of that. I stopped at Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Museum in Fremont, Ohio. They scheduled a demonstration day for me to show the process, and a lot of people came, a lot of old photographer guys and stuff, and that. So I wasn't on the fringe. I wasn't under a rock. I was 5-page spread in People magazine. I was Chicago Tribune, a couple pages. I mean, I can't think of all the places. There was just so many.
I mean, this is a big deal for all these little towns, right? I mean, it's not like you're going through huge cities probably most of the time. You're probably sticking to the back roads. There's lots of little towns, and this is news for them.
Yeah, I didn't go through big cities. It was too dangerous.
Right.
But the big cities would send their reporters out, like the Chicago Tribune, do stories on me and stuff. But anyway, yeah, it just, I was being in the public eye about this stuff. I wasn't just on the edge.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people probably of today, whenever they hear about you and living out on the farm, kind of a secluded kind of person, but you've probably had more interaction with people across America than any other photographer that's currently using this process. I mean, you were meeting these people face to face where they lived. They were coming to see you. There's this guy that's rolling into town on this wagon. You've had tremendous exposure to people.
Yeah, I felt like I was a temporary resident wherever I went.
Yeah,
that was like that.
Kind of a funny story. You mentioned that the police had came to find you. I've got a quote here from Mark Osterman, which I know you are familiar with. He's been quoted as saying that John Coffer is an American original. He was among the first to revive the wet plate process, and no one has been doing it continuously longer or better. Now, do you know that the New York State Police was once on the lookout for you because of Mark Osterman? Have you heard this story?
I never. Yeah, the New York State Police never.
Yeah, I don't think they found you. I think when Mark was trying to learn a little bit about the process, he had seen one of these articles that was written about this guy in a wagon, and he was using this process. And Mark was trying to track you down just so he could ask you some questions. So I thought that was kind of funny that you've had a couple of run-ins with folks that want to interview you.
Yeah, well, the way that all broke down, the truth of it and all is that I was settled here. I wasn't on the road. I've been here for probably 3 years. I settled here on my farm in fall of 85. And then my second apprentice came along, Claude LeVay. I'm sure you've heard of Claude LeVay.
I have, yes.
And he came knocking on my door, and he said, "I want to learn the old process, the wet plate process." He says, "I've been a reenactor, but I'm also a professional photographer. I've been out of my way to get a job at Cornell as a photographer on their staff, so that I could come over and study with you." And I was impressed. And I said, "Okay, you'll be my apprentice. And because you have an automobile van, we can go to some faraway Civil War events." And he was like, "Yeah, no problem." So, I mean, I was still going to nearby events in my horse-drawn wagon, but, stuff down in Virginia, that it was just impractical to break away from the farm and be down there and stuff. So Claude helped me out that way. But so anyway, and the 125th year of Civil War reenacting, the battle is 125th. The Gettysburg, that was, a lot of people considered that was the apex of Civil War reenacting, the 125th reenactment. And they did a big spread, like there was a front page picture, and nearly the whole magazine for U.S. News and World Report was about this 125th reenactment. And they had a half a page on me, a picture of me with rinsing a plate and a wooden bucket, and it described that, that May and Claude LeVay were doing actual original process photography, tintypes, amber types, and glass negatives at this event. Well, that's what Mark read. He read that.
Yep.
And he got my address, and I have a feeling that, and I don't know this for sure, that he must have got my address from the Eastman House, because I had been there. I had made contact with the Eastman House in the summer of '85. I was at the Genesee Country Museum doing the reenactment they had there, and the just general public and so on. And anyway, I've been had a story done on me on the Rochester newspaper, and it just happened that some of the staff at the Eastman House, Grant Romer in particular, who was like the head curator there, read the story, and he called the museum up and he said, we got to come out and meet this man. We don't know anybody's doing this kind of photography, and we got to come out and so they made an appointment with me, and most of the entire staff came from the Eastman House, and I did a 8x10 ferrotype tintype group picture of them, and the gods were with me that day because it came out perfect. It came out perfect.
Yeah, that's good.
I only charged $20 for an 8x10 ferrotype tintype back then, believe it or not. Anyway, so I don't know whatever happened to that plate. I wish I knew. Grant got it. Maybe he still has it if he still lives. And then the process of the thing, they were so impressed that Grant says, we got to get you to the museum. So I said, sure, no problem. We'll keep in contact. I don't know if they took me up there right after that or then introduced me to, I can't remember exactly on that, but eventually they came and got me, take me to the museum. I remember going through the security guys' corridor there and Grant saying, this man is John Coffer, treat him as if he were one of our staff and just let him in
Nice.
anytime he wants to come in. And I was like, whoa, this is wonderful. So, I had access to all the archives without anybody tagging along with me.
Yeah.
I could go through everything, the bins of old cameras or whatever, all, they gave me carte blanche.
Yeah. Don't you wish you'd had that kind of access 10 years before that?
Yeah. I was very productive and I did, a fair amount of research and so on. And, but at the same time, they said, John, we're going to schedule you here for a demonstration. Would you do that? And I said, sure. If you come get me, and drive me up, I will do. So I did several demonstrations of the process there and also portraits. They said, you can also do any portraits and keep the money if you want, So I was set up on the front yard and in the garden area off to the side there and all that. So they, I was sort of basically their wet plate guy for a number of years. So that's why I say, it wouldn't have been hard for somebody to call Eastman House and say, this John Coffer guy? And they would say, sure. You need his address? We got it right here.
Yep.
So anyway, Mark did wrote me and told me about and sent me pictures, a big brown envelope of his medicine show he was doing. He was really into authenticity and so on. And he did teaching at the George School, and he was, he wouldn't mind showing his students how to do wet plate photography. And he said, would you teach me how to do it? So I said, I wrote him back. I said, well, if you want to come for several, tutorial days, here's my price, and I'll teach you everything I know. Well, he never came. Never wrote back. And he never wrote back. And then, I hear from Claude that spring that he had gone to Claude, and Claude had showed him how to do the process. So, and I asked Claude later. I said, Claude, when you taught Mark how to do the process and all, weren't you aware that you were like creating some new competition for yourself? And Claude said, well, Mark is a really sharp guy. He probably would have figured it out on his own anyway, which he probably would have, no doubt. But he got his first live in-person instruction from Claude. And in the meantime, Mark did come by here. He wrote me and said, I'm coming up to Eastman House to do some research. I want to stop by. We'll just talk shop. I'm doing wet plate now. And I said, sure, yeah, stop by. We'll talk shop. And we had nice visits. And eventually he got in with the Eastman House and became their head of historic processes. And Eastman House forgot about me.
You had their own in-house resource then, yeah.
Yeah, so I became persona non grata after that. But whatever, I was busy with the farm here and everything, and getting into the art scene myself. When Mark first started showing wet plate art, it was amber types, and he told me about a show he had in Philadelphia, and he said, I sold a plate for, I think it was like $600 or something. And I was like, unbelievable. I can't believe anybody would pay $600 for an amber, a new made amber type, and then years later, my work went for way more than that,
right.
And shows that I had in New York City and, Santa Fe, different places.
Well, let's talk a little bit about my first exposure to John Coffer, and it was an image that was in, I think it was probably back in 2016. I saw this image in Christopher James's manual, The Book of Alternative Photographic Processes, and I think it was an image of a hay pile, and it had kind of a primitive ladder set up on one side. It was really contrasty, a really amazing image.
It had sort of a very atmospheric look to it. Yeah. I know that.
How would you describe your style or approach to creating images using this process?
As far as my art stuff, of course, I still do portraits on commission. And of course, I did lots and lots of portraits on the road and reenactments. But just for my own, arty type stuff, it was just mostly just stuff around my farm.
Okay.
And documenting my life here, more or less. And, I kind of felt like, they were scenes that harmonized with the process, being a historic process. So if I did a portrait, a whole plate, ferrotype, tintype of my ox team, well, hey, they did that. It could have been done 150 years ago.
Right.
I have no interest in, going off and photographing, the Harley Davidson meet down in Watkins Glen or something like that. I just felt like just use modern cameras if you're going to shoot that kind of stuff. I want my stuff to be more or less something that could have been done back then.
Right.
That harmonized with that era, that section of time. I sort of like got to 1929 now, and in my life. So, if I do a tintype of my wet plate or something of my 23 Model T touring car or something, I feel like, well, Charlie Tremere, he was doing wet plate tintypes starting in 1929 at the Greenfield Village studio, and I remember seeing some of his, when I actually went back later and talked to the curator, and he showed me more of Charlie's work of people standing by their old cars having their portrait made on ferrotype tintypes.
Yeah.
And that. So I just kind of feel, in harmony with that sort of stuff. But and I'm a real student of, even my portrait work and that, I'm a real student of original images. What was the style back then? For example, rarely ever did a subject look straight into the lens of the camera. Now it's like everybody's having people look straight into the lens of the camera. It was a rare thing back in the day. And also just a face head, hardly ever done, if ever, in the 19th century. People wanted to show more of their body and their clothing, etc. So I kind of lean that way in my own work.
Yeah.
I want to emulate my ancestors, photographers, as much as I can.
John, would you say that your style has changed any over the years as you've gained more recognition, maybe not only in the collodion community, but also in the gallery setting?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Nope. I'm not a money-driven person. And obviously, I was on the road. My wagon's living on about $2,000 a year. But I had enough to get by, and that's all that mattered. Like my old friend Sid Wilson, who was 100 years old, and he was a cowboy in Arizona. He said, "I don't make a living. I just live on what I make." And I bet that's been my way of handling it mostly, over the years. But no, yeah, when I've shown and major galleries in New York, Aperture Gallery, Gerald Peters Gallery. I've had some really big shows there, and I show only original work. That's it, and I've showed amber types and albumin prints, but primarily it's nearly all real ferrotype tintypes.
Okay.
I use aluminum plates for test shots, and we use them in the class here when I do my classes, because nothing beats those peel and pour aluminum plates for people to learn the basic process. But for my artwork, it's got to be a real deal ferrotype tintype that I make from scratch. Black Japan, bake in the ovens here. It gives me the superior blacks that the aluminum plates can't deliver, and it's the real deal. It's authentic.
Right.
So that's all I show. I don't have these inkjet, so-called collodion prints that the gallery sells for limited edition baloney and stuff. No, absolutely not.
Right.
I know that's where the money's at. That's what people say. Oh, John, you don't know. That's where the money's at. Well, screw that. I want my legacy to be a little different than that. I want pass on the real deal.
Right. Is there a favorite subject that you have had over the years?
Hard to nail anything down. This is almost sort of in jest.
Okay.
That you bring that up. In my classes, I had him here. I've had him here for 20 years now or something. Bucky Bones. Bucky Bones is a full-size skeleton. It's not a real human skeleton. It's a simulated.
Yep.
A very, very well done simulated human skeleton. And Bucky Bones, all my students have to take a picture of Bucky Bones. And we dress them up in all kinds of get-ups and hats and glasses, and pipes, you name it. He sometimes he's a spirit image, things like that.
Right.
And so whenever I have to, and I'm testing out chemicals, testing out, you name it, Bucky's there for me. And I do a shot of Bucky. And my girlfriend says, she's like, I am so sick of looking at these pictures of Bucky Bones. I said, but he's handy. It's handy.
Well, you don't have to worry about him moving too much and getting out of focus. So that's
right.
one plus.
Right. It's great fun for my students. Like I said, he's a handy subject and such. But yeah, so I don't know. Otherwise, I don't know what to say on that. As far as my most favorite subject, like I said, sort of rural scene, the rural subject matter that is nearby me, and I'd like to do more of my oxen and cattle and so on as time goes on, because nobody's doing that.
Right. So what are some of your pieces of photographic gear that gets pretty regular use? Do you still have that original camera that you bought from the store shop window?
No, I don't.
Ah, okay.
Amazingly.
Traded it up, huh?
My wife, who became my ex-wife eventually, after here shortly, told me that I needed to sell that camera and do something else for a living. And I somehow caved in and sold that camera, which I always regret. because they had a really fast lens. They had a 3.5 brass lens, really excellent. Schultz Billerbeck lens, German lens. Anyway, and then half a year later, she was gone, and so I had to turn to other cameras I had, and you know, and have bought cameras over the years and so on. But unfortunately, I don't have that Century number 4.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Somewhere out there. Yeah. But I still have the photographic wagon, and I built a museum building for it because I feel it's important that it be preserved, because it's the last horse-drawn traveling photographer's wagon ever in the world. I don't anticipate anybody ever do that again.
Right.
And so it needs to be preserved as a historical artifact.
Do you have any other pieces of equipment that maybe have a special history or story behind them?
Oh yeah, I've got the most incredible one is how I got my first head brace stand, an original head brace stand. I had knocked together simple things, using old floor lamps or something and stuff. But when I was on my travels with the wagons, I think it was in Ohio, we stopped at a farm to make camp for the evening. And the farmer there, an older fellow, he invited us up to the house, and he said, in the morning, come on up for breakfast. Well, have breakfast together at the house. And he says, well, as you come up, look at my old barn. There's a lot of old stuff in there you might be interested in seeing. So that morning, I'm heading up to the house. Where the barn doors were open. I looked at the barn, and I'm scanning it quickly, and then I locked onto this head brace stand. I was like, holy shit.
Wow.
There's an original 1860s or so head brace stand. And so I went to breakfast, and I told the farmer guy, I said, did you know you have an original 1860s photographer's head brace stand in your barn? He said, oh, that thing. Oh, we didn't know what that was. We thought it was something a dentist used or whatever. we were going to cut the top off and make a little table for, to put potted plants on or something. And I said, well, that's something I've been looking for many years, and I would like to buy that from you. And he said, oh, no, you can just have it. If you can use it, you can have it. Okay. So I was just on cloud nine. The devil on my shoulder said, John, get the head brace stand and your wagon and out of there before he changes his mind. But the little angel on the other shoulder said, no, you need to do something nice for these people, that they would give you that head brace stand. So I said to the guy, I said, listen, I can't just take this head brace stand for nothing. Would you mind? I'll stay over. It was a Saturday. I said, I'll stay over a day and do tintype portraits of your family for free. And he said, yeah, that would be great. He said, we'll get some of the neighbors over and they'll be paying customers for you. And so I said, fabulous. I'll go get set up. And as I went back to the barn, I go in and get the head brace stand. And I noticed one of the headpiece prongs was missing. It was like broke off halfway and missing. Okay. I thought to myself, no problem. I can forge out a match for that and weld it on. You'll never be able to know the difference. So I took the stand back to, by my wagons, and I set up, and I'm starting to shoot portraits of the family. They had several grandchildren, sons and such, and these neighbors were coming over. Well, anyway, the grandsons had gotten a set of golf clubs out of the same barn that I had gotten the old head brace stand out of. And they were hitting rocks with the golf clubs that were in the barnyard there, and sending them off yonder in the field and all. But they were just right close to me, only a few yards away from me, and I was starting to get worried that they might hit my camera with the rock or something could go wrong here.
Sure.
So before I said anything, and it's a good thing I lagged a little bit. The one boy, he winds up for a line drive shot with a big golf club, and and he misses the rock that he was aiming for, and he hits the dirt, and out popped the broken off piece of the head brace stand and lands right at my feet.
Wow.
And so anyway, my wife there, she said, "Is that the piece that off the stand?" And I said, "Yes." there it is. A little rusty, of course. I don't know how long it had been laying there in the dirt or whatever. And it was clearly under the dirt because he hit it with a golf club to pop it out of the dirt. So anyway, so I picked it up and I said, "Oh, I'm in business now. All I got to do is clean this up and brace it back on the prong there on the head piece, and she'll be just like as new." But there was a little bit of original dark green paint on the stand that I was able to use to match up the paint. And then, after I brazed that piece on it, I painted it the dark green color as close as I could match the original paint. And so that's how it is today.
Nice. Well, that saved you some time from having to reforge another pad for it then. That's great.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But, it just really said to me that stand was made for me. I mean, it was meant to be mine.
Yeah.
And if I had, of course, the moral of the story is if I had just said, "Okay, thanks for the stand," and then packed up and headed out down the road, then I would have missed out on the complete stand.
Right.
So those stories like that are just abundant in my wagon travels, and if anybody's interested in reading about the wagon travels, I did write the Horse-Hares in My Soup book and sold that on my travels, but I also have it on my website. You can read it for free.
Great. Yep.
Horse-Hares in My Soup.
I've seen it on your site and probably read through the first couple of chapters or so whenever you were just getting started.
That it's not the whole travels, the book that's out, ebook. I'd like to write more, but it's the first few months and gives you a good taste of what it was like to be out like I was.
Sure.
That's the way I look at it. But yeah, there was just incredible stuff happened all over the years.
John, let me ask you this: whenever you set out on this journey to learn about wetplate, did you really have any sense of how important that your experience would be to breathe new life into this process?
Not at all. I mean, somewhat, but still at the same time, I didn't have any clue that it would go as far as it has. I just thought maybe I would do it at reenactments, and there might be a couple other guys I'd teach that would do it at reenactments, and that would be the end of it.
Yeah.
I never thought that it would become this art thing, and that my tintypes would end up in galleries, the first art tintypes to ever be done, and things like that. I had no thought of that,
Yeah.
happening or anticipation of that happening. As when art galleries came to me, and they said, "Well, you would like to show your work?" It just took me by surprise. I was like, "Really? Why? What would you want to show?" They said, "Well, it's art," and I was like, "Yeah, okay. Well, I got some test shots here. What do you think?" "Oh, we could. Oh, yeah, we can sell that. Oh, yeah, we can. We can sell that one." Like, okay, whatever. So it just kind of all fell on my lap.
Did you think in those early days that this would become a lifelong calling for you? I mean, did you have any idea how long you were going to be shooting this type of photography?
Oh, I felt as though this was my niche.
Okay.
For life. I just felt like, I'd finally come home to what I was meant to do. I tried a lot of different things when I lived in Florida, as far as modern photography and so on, and it just didn't click really. So there was I felt like, this is it. This, I mean, as far as wetplate, I wanted to, early on, I decided that this is enough on my plate to I wasn't really that interested in trying to master all the 19th century processes or even early 20th century processes.
Okay.
I just felt like if I could just master and keep learning about wetplate collodion photography and what's sort of related to it, which I do too, is albumin printing for my glass negatives. Then that's enough. It's just that's a lifetime of endeavor, because I'm constantly still discovering new things and innovating new stuff for wetplate. And I just felt like I don't need to spread myself thin trying to make master daguerreotypes or master carbon printing or all these various things.
Sure. Yeah. There's always something to learn if you want to, but sometimes it's good to become a master at one, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of crafts and things I do outside of photography, and I still shoot black and white photography, develop film, and just for my own snapshots and things too. But as far as art and my craft, it's been wetplate, and that's what it'll probably always be.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did digital photography. I have a digital camera for snapshots and document things at the Jamboree and stuff like that. There's a time and place for lots of forms of photography and that. But as far as my art and my specialty, whatever it's been, wetplate.
Right.
It will always be.
John, let me ask you this. Over the years, have you ever thought about one more trip in the wagon?
No, I'm getting too old for that. And I've tied down with my farm.
Yeah.
I got a lot of animals and that. I've kind of toyed around with at some point, maybe later on in life, getting into my my 1929 Model A pickup and retrace my steps.
Ah, okay.
Then I went in the wagon and ask around and try to find people whose portraits I made.
Nice.
Did they remember? Did they remember the guy that came through with the horse and wagon that did tintype portraits? And some that had been children then, and that might have said, "Oh yeah, we still have that plate, that you did," and whatever. That would be quite interesting to go back and look at some of that and talk to people I had that maybe still be living that I'd camped at their place or their parents' place or their grandparents' place or whatever, and see what I could find.
Sure. No, that would be fun.
And when I did find an individual that as an 8-year-old, I had done their portrait with their family. And as a 50-something-year-old or 60, I do another portrait of them.
Nice.
A
little bit of detective work there to track them down. That'd be a lot of fun.
But it could it's just maybe it's just a fantasy, but it'd be interesting. And of course, with just like the horse and wagon. Well, it wouldn't be as much as the horse and wagon, the ox and drawn wagon, but with the 1929 Model A pickup, going around doing tintype pictures, I would get some attention and have a chance to, visit with different people and maybe come a better chance to discover what's still out there. But I mean, even in my own in the years not so long ago, I had situations where I have somebody come up to my display, or I'd be set up, say, shooting at a reenactment or something, a grown man, and I'd have there might be a tintype on my display of a boy, a child, and I say, "Can I help you, sir?" And he's looking at it, he points to the tintype and he says, "That's me."
That's me.
And I'm like, "Wow, I've been doing this so long, and you're all grown up and even recognize you,
Right.
But I've had instances like that, where I've been on the road, short trips, not from here and stuff, and somebody will say, "Yeah, you did my son's picture at Gettysburg back in 1980 something or whatever." And really, you know, so it is kind of a small world out there in a way too.
Right.
But yeah, it just it reminds me of how long I've been around, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, John, something else that's been around for a while, and you mentioned it a while ago. Let's talk a little bit about the Tin Type Jamboree. I think the next one is in August of 2024. How did that get together come to be? What was the driver for that?
Well, actually, my inspiration came from the Eastman House when they had a thing called the Collodion Conference. This would be 2001, and 9/11 hit right at the time they were doing it, and it kind of got, I don't know, messed up in ways. I mean, they only did a little sort of thing,
okay,
because a lot of people couldn't come. No flights were in the air and all that stuff. But anyway, that kind of inspired me to think, well, I could do something like that, on my farm. And so, others that I taught, students to that, talked it over and I said, we got to get together, just to shoot. And so that's was the genesis of it. And I think the first, I don't even know if we called it Jamboree, the very first little gathering, like 8 people, we got together and camped and shot plates. And Mike Jacobson came and, brought chemicals that people had ordered. Or, we had a little raffle. It just sort of bumped along for a number of years. And I started calling it the Jamboree and that. And I call it, it's called a wet plate collodion jamboree. It's not just tin types; it's anything to do with wet plate. So it kind of just bumped along for a number of years with just a dozen, maybe 15 people would come and we'd get together and camp, and they'd all camp here, or many of them would, and we'd shoot wet plate together and just share ideas and talk shop. Nothing better in person than to do that in person. Talk shop, see each other's innovations and equipment and all that. And so it just, there was some time, one point there, I just thought I might not even, I don't know if this is worth it, They just, everyone said, no, we got to keep doing it, I said, all right. And so we just, every year, about the 1st of August is generally about when it happens, and then it's just grown. It's just grown from that. And we've had one year we had as many 60, 65 wet players here.
And has that been recently, John? Then I mean, as
well, this is before the COVID thing.
Okay, yeah,
a couple years before the COVID thing, and then the numbers dropped. Not terribly, but dropped, to like 40 people showing up and wet players because of the COVID thing, which we still did the Jamboree. But anyway, and then it's rising again now. I think we had like close to 50 something this last year, and it's going to go up. I think this next year from indications. I got people writing me already and saying they're coming. I get people from all over the world, coming through my workshops, and as well as to the Jamboree. People from England, of course, Canada, various places have come to the Jamboree.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I know that the European folks have got the European Collodion weekend that they get together on a yearly basis, but as far as here in the States, I think the Jamboree is really the only thing that's really been around for any amount of time. So I hope that you're able to keep it up for a few more years, and hopefully we'll get some new folks out there to attend and get to hang out and talk some shop sometime.
Yeah, I'm kind of tentatively thinking that the 25th one will be my last one, though.
Okay.
I'll let somebody else do it. but next year will be the 23rd Jamboree here, and it's always free. Always has been. Then we have a raffle, which we have lots of stuff in. People donate. People like UV, Brian Coulter sends a lot of stuff. Art Craft puts a lot of stuff in the Jamboree. It's just, there's been many, that have done that. And then the individuals will donate things to Jamboree. But that's kind of how I, cover my expenses and that.
Sure.
For it. And, and then Art Craft pays for a big banquet on Saturday. It's a big free meal, all you can eat. That's been going on for almost from the beginning. It's kind of neat in that I don't have any limit. I was like, only 30 people will be allowed to come to the Jamboree. If 100 people come, I'll find room for them here.
If you can find a place to pitch the tent, then you're welcome, right?
Yeah. And I kind of feel good about the fact that if there's somebody that's just struggling along and they don't have a lot of money to blow on stuff, they can come here for free and shoot wetplate with us and get a free meal too.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
It's very egalitarian that way. But like I said, it's a lot. Many of my students do come. But I have lots of people that have never been my students that, they're welcome. I'm not trying to be, some kind of selective about, only certain ones are allowed to come and all that stuff, There's people that come that I don't like, but I don't care. They can come and set up and shoot. There's plenty of room here.
So, John, speaking of students, you're still holding workshops for people to attend, if they want to learn about the process. You have the manual, the Doer's Guide, that's been available for a number of years. How does it make you feel a lot of people, they purchase that Doer's Guide, and that's all the information that they need. You have really put together a well-versed manual for them to follow step by step and get off to a good start.
Well, the thing with the Doer's Guide, I wrote my first version of it in 2000, and it was done right here, handwritten, and I just took the handwritten pages to the drugstore, to the copy machine, and copied it all, each set off myself, and put it in the 3-ring binder, and the way it went. But my objective was to write as much as I knew about doing the process and make it so somebody could get this and do it themselves, teach themselves the process if they wanted to. And many have, that's been my job. I didn't want to just write a manual that was just sort of a starting point thing. And if you wanted to really get into it, then you needed to take a workshop and that sort of stuff. I wanted to write it for me. If I was a beginner, that's what I would want. I want a manual that's got everything I need to know in it, plus. And so I've got also the 3.5-hour DVD set that comes with the manual. And that was the first wetplate instruction video that I ever done. My assistant at the time, Tom DeLuza, who's the master wetplater now and does great work, but he was my assistant, and he was just graduated from Alfred and visual arts, photography, and so on. And he told me that he had worked doing video and such at school. And I said, well, could you do a video of me teaching the process? And sure. So that's what we did. It was around 2005 or 6, somewhere around there. And not fancy equipment. It was this a cheap one of these cartridge loaded video cameras, from years back.
Sure. Yep.
He used it. We only had like an hour of shoot time. He'd come from Alfred and say, okay, we got an hour, and I just have to wing it, and a lot of it was just the first take, and that was it. We went with it, but it's got, you know, how to mix chemicals, do the basic product, all about, choosing, equipment, lenses, how to black Japan ferrotype plates to make real ferrotype tintypes. It's all there.
Great.
So, but I put a disclaimer with it in the manual saying that this video is from 2005, and there's been changes. May not be doing things quite the same as I was, and I know I'm not. All in all, this is solid information here, and let's take it from there. And it's kind of archival footage in a way, because it goes back to 2006 and such. But I'm constantly adding to and changing the manual. It's always in a state of flux because I'm always learning new things, and I'm always innovating new things, finding ways to do things better, what have you, more quality, brighter images, whatever. The beauty of the way I do this manual, they're basically made one at a time. It's just it's in a 3-ring binder. It's not handwritten anymore. It's typeset.
Okay.
I take to the Dundee drugstore and use the copy machine and make like 2.5 sets or so, and then I put it together here, and it gives me the opportunity that if I spot something, in what I have, like, oh wow, I didn't spell that word right, or whatever, or gee, I could phrase that a lot better. I can sit down and I've got a laptop computer and a printer and redo it, fix it.
Nice. There you go. Constant refreshing.
Yeah. So it's not like somebody would say I have 10,000 copies of their manual printed in Hong Kong, and now they're stuck and they have to sell those before they would ever do another printing, even if there's errors or whatever, I invite people that, if you see an error, tell me about it. I'll fix it. Or, say, hey, you could do this and that better. This is how I do it. Tell me about it. All they do is write me. Probably do some changes or whatever. But just here in the last couple of days, I've done a complete rewrite of the procedure for black Japan tin plates, because I over the years I could say I could write that better. That could be done better, and so I have. So the next manuals, I sent out. I got a couple I got to send out tomorrow. We'll have the new rewrite for Japan tin in it. But I also added something that no one else would ever do in a million years nowadays. Is I put in an actual ferrotype tintype that I shot.
Okay.
And it's got the period, metal mats that I make, or the period embossed paper mats or whatever, for presentation. It's in with the manual and it explains about it, and and such about how it's a real ferrotype and such. And because I wanted people to know, in this day and age of the aluminum plates being so common, that I wanted them to firsthand know what a real ferrotype, black Japan ferrotype, looks like and feels like. Because a lot of people, they don't even have an old original tintype, to compare to. And that's when I started. That's what I was, that was my goal, to make tintypes just like these old original ones that I had in my collection.
Yeah.
And so, but in the 19th century, Edward Estabrook, in his book, Manual of Ferrotype and How to Make It, he put 2 ferrotypes of his shooting in each manual. And if you can find one of those original manuals, they're worth a fortune. But that's what he did. And the point was, he wanted, would-be ferrotype tintypists to have a benchmark, to be able to see, oh, okay, yeah, well, this is top of the line stuff, and this is something I need to strive for. If people don't have nothing to compare to, it's hard to know where you're at.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, giving them a physical item to be able to compare against instead of
Yeah.
maybe just looking at a computer screen or something and saying, well, that
No,
that
you
looks
can't
pretty
tell.
close. You can't tell,
Yeah,
right?
you can't tell on the computer screen. Yeah. And I mean, I've seen people even try to make the point that there's no difference between a cyanide fixed plate and a hypo fixed plate, and they'll have flash stuff on the computer screen. Oh yeah, they look like pretty close, identical. But in real life, if you look at them in real life, anybody and everybody would say, "Oh my goodness, the cyanide fixed plate has much nicer tones to it." And I also put in an albumin print of my printing and making, gold tone double coat albumin print, card mounted on a carte de visite that I print up, so that people will see reason that they can get some inspiration from that and say, "Well, wow, these albumin prints are nice," and they're worth doing. They're worth giving a shot, instead of just scans of a aluminum type and inkjet prints. There's nothing like a real deal albumin print if it's done well.
John, let me ask you this. So you've been shooting wet plates since the early 1980s, which is probably longer than anyone that's around today, right?
Absolutely. 42 years.
Yeah.
Over 42 years, yeah.
What kind of advice do you have for current wet plate artists to stay motivated in using this process? It seems like there's a lot of folks today that get into it for just a short amount of time, and it's too much work, right? But how do you stay with it?
There's always, you can always do better. You can always, there's, challenging yourself to don't just get in a rut and leave it at that. That you can always do better and strive for excellence if you can. I guess I don't know. In my manual, I have on the last page of my manual, I have a quote from Superman of Marvel Comics. He says, "Ideals do in fact exist and are worth striving for." So,
okay. Perfection is always out there at some point, but it's always just barely out of reach.
Yeah. So don't follow the pack. I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe it's something to do with social media, internet, and so on. That it's too much, following the crowd. Not enough imagination and cutting your own, trail and doing something really unique and special in that.
Right.
That's like one of the things I include with my manual too, with the DVDs. I have the DVD that has my tintype movies on it. I don't know if you've seen those.
I have seen those online, yes. I like the one that shows the pair of boots walking into the cabin, I think.
Yeah, that was the first one. But that's something nobody ever thought of ever doing. And I decided, hey, I could do this. And me and my assistant, Tom DeLuzza, we worked on it and did it, so the first tintype movies. But, it is, of course, we're using the computer to animate them and that. And, but, it's still it was an interesting angle on using the new with the old, I think.
Right. John, I really do appreciate you being on the podcast. You've got just such a unique story, and not just from the wet plate perspective. I mean, being able to take that initiative to go out in that wagon and see America is really an amazing story. What is the best way for folks to reach out to you, maybe about workshops or to maybe get some other details on your work?
Well, I have my website, which is just chock full of videos and information and all the dates of the workshops. And generally, I working for me at present times. For many years, it was just you had to write me, and it's somewhat like that yet today. If somebody's interested in my workshops and taking them, I like them to have enough initiative to write me.
Sure.
Either ask about them or if you go right ahead and send a deposit, for the workshop, and then after that, I give them my phone number. Because I don't really want to be a person all bogged down with answering calls all day and on social media chit chatting and all that stuff. That's something that I don't want to get into. Yeah, I mean, they could email me if they want. I do have an email address, camptintype@yahoo.com.
Okay.
As a possibility.
And your main website, John, that has all of this contact information is johncoffer.com, correct?
Yeah, or if you use Google, you just Google Camp Tintype.
Gotcha. Okay.
It'll come right up.
Perfect.
But yeah, I'm not big on the social media stuff and that. I'm just so busy with my farm and everything I'm into and that. Put a lot of time in that. If there's a will, there's a way to get a hold of me.
Right.
Right. I make it a little bit of a challenge because I want sincere people to come here and learn the process. I don't want just people that are just debutantes for last week we went skydiving and this week we're doing wetplate tintypes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I like having people that are students that are really into it. They really want to do it.
Got it.
And that kind of separates them out a little bit if they have to write me and schedule a tutorial or come to the workshop.
Sure.
That if people can't handle that, I guess that's just the way it is.
Move on. That's right. Well, John, thanks again for sharing your story. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad that we were able to connect and record an episode here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. I appreciate you having me on.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode and maybe even picked up some insights that will help you along in your own wetplate journey. I'd love to hear from you on who you'd like to have on in a future episode. So send me a message and follow our Instagram account at 10 Questions with any feedback. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider. Thanks for listening to me, Chad Shryock, and my expert guests, and I look forward to you joining me again in the coming weeks for a new episode of 10 Questions.